A build like this doesn't come along every day, my friends. No, this is a special build. It's the very last build that we're putting together in 2024, but this build is designed for 2025 and onwards. This is a Mini ITX system that we will be taking to CES 2025 to help produce our coverage there, and it is pretty stacked in terms of the amount of hardware that we're shoving into this TR100 case from Thermaltake.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise, tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. Just look at that glorious pile of components. I want to point out before I start going over these individually that this build is tailored for video editing. That's why we have the 16-core 9950X. That's why we went for a higher capacity memory kit, and that's why we have two 4TB NVMe SSDs. If you wanted to build a really cool all-white Mini ITX system in the TR100 case, you can't yet because that case isn't out yet, but it'll be out soon. But if you were going more for a gaming PC that was a little bit less tailored towards video editing, then I would absolutely swap out the 9950X CPU for a 9800X3D or possibly 9900X3D, 9950X3D when those come out. They're expected to be announced at CES. And likewise, I might consider upgrading the graphics card. For one, we're gonna have RTX 50 series cards launching really soon, so that might be something to keep an eye on. For another, I was actually considering a 4080 Super for this build. MSI has one that's not too huge in terms of the cooler size and length that would fit. That would get a little bit more performance out of the GPU, but we still have 16 gigs of VRAM, so again, for our video editing purposes, that should still work just fine. Likewise, our memory kit here was chosen a lot for aesthetics as well as the capacity. There aren't a lot of 96 gig 2DIMM kits, so this is two 48 gig DIMMs. If you want a 2x48 gig kit that's like a reasonable speed, DDR5 6000 or better, as well as tight timings, your options are pretty limited, and they become even more limited if you also want that kit to be a nice pristine white finish. But if you were doing this build as a gaming PC, I'd say a 32 gig kit will do you just fine, or even a 64 gig kit. And there you'll be able to find white finish kits that maybe have Expo settings instead of just XMP, because Expo settings are going to be better for setting up an AMD build. For our purposes, we were really focused on the high capacity, so having a 96 gig kit was the way to go, and that's why we opted for this one. Our other gigabyte component is our motherboard, the X870i Aorus Pro Ice. This is a really, really nice looking Mini ITX motherboard with a really clean all-white finish. It has two M.2 slots. That's one area where I feel like I wish we could have maybe just one more. But again, if you're building a video editing system, this motherboard is going to be just fine for you. We are going to be populating both of the M.2 slots on this motherboard with two 4TB Lexar NVMe SSDs, and then we'll be supplementing our storage for video editing purposes with external drives. The X870i Aorus Pro Ice sells for $300, so you got to pay a premium for the ITX form factor and a premium for the all-white finish. That said, it's not a $400 or $500 motherboard, so there is something to be said for having a board that meets those criteria while also not being like crazy overpriced. Our power supply is the Lian Li SP850, which is an 850 watt SFX power supply, which is also fully modular and also has a 12VH power connector, so we can directly connect our RTX 40 series power supply without using an adapter. And again, when you're looking for a power supply that is SFX form factor, that's all white, that's fully modular, that has that 12VH power cable, there's actually not a lot of them to choose from, so I'm glad that Lian Li produces this one, and it's also 80+ gold rated with a 5-year warranty. Lastly, we have our Thermaltake components, and this is a preview build in their new case, the TR100. We first saw this at Computex last year, or I guess I should say earlier this year. And I actually asked Thermaltake directly when I was setting up this build for this case, and they said, it's actually not quite ready yet. They're looking to launch very soon. I'm not going to say an exact launch date because I don't want to like pin anything down right now that might be subject to change in the future. But thankfully they were able to make some executive decisions, and they said, all right, Paul, you get to do a preview build, in this case, the TR100. So I'll give you guys a first look at that, the build process and all the features. And then of course we have our Thermaltake all-in-one liquid cooler, the TH240 V2 Ultra. Very clean looking all-white finish AIO with an LCD that can display useful things like, you know, the CPU temperature, the liquid temperature, and then matching fans, the CT120EX. These are the ARGB sync versions, and they're available in reverse as well as standard airflow direction. We've got two three packs. We're not going to be using all of those, but we do have options for placing fans in the case to enhance our airflow, and also making sure that if we're doing intakes, we can use those reverse ones so that the unsightly backside of the fans don't show. And those are the components we're building with for this final build of 2024. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. Let's put this thing together. I feel special today because, again, I get to be one of the first people to like actually do a build in this case outside of Thermaltake, and you know, it makes me feel special. I'm also very glad that Thermaltake sent over the snow white version of this case because I had spent some extra effort making sure that we had all nice matching white components for this build. And if I haven't already made this clear, this is an early build with this case. And I believe this is the finished version, but there might still be some small minor tweaks and stuff that Thermaltake does when this actually debuts and goes up for sale to the public. Part of the reason there's some excitement and interest in the TR100 though is because it's a small form factor case, and this is not the smallest of SFF cases by any means. I don't know how many liters this case is right off the top of my head, but I can give you the dimensions. 15.39 inches long, just shy of 12 inches high, and just over 7 inches wide. And for you metric heathens out there, that is 391 in length by 294 in height by 179 in width. And this being my first time like actually working with this case, again, I saw it at CES, or I'm sorry, at Computex last year, but I didn't get to like actually build in it or anything. But let's just start doing a little overview here. At the front, we have on-off switch, of course. I believe that's our resets. We got a mic and headphone jack, a couple USB 3.0s, and that Type-C port. Lots of ventilation on this case, which is nice. We got ventilation on the bottom, side, top, opposite side, and then there's a quick look at the back. You can see a triple slot expansion for graphics cards. Probably 3 slots is going to be about the max here, maybe 3+, but you don't want to go much beyond that. So I know there are going to be like some RTX 4090s that can fit in this case, but probably you're going to either want to go with a lower card like a 4080 Super, 4070 Ti Super like we are doing today, or who knows when the 50 series launches. Hopefully those cards will have some like high performing but also efficient versions that can have coolers that are not ridiculously huge. Here's a look at the accessory kit that comes in the box. We have a roll of hook and loop Velcro. We have this bracket here, which I don't know what it does, but I'm guessing that's going to be like a support for the graphics card. We have this, which I have no idea what this is. How's that for the front? All right, so Joe has found where this seems to line up on the front here, and maybe it's so you can put in like an LCD. Oh, it's the LCD adapter. Oh. It's the LCD adapter because Thermaltake has like a standard size LCD screen that can fit in a lot of their cases. It doesn't ship with the TR100, but using this bracket, you can put it in right there. Ha, we figured it out. We also have this guy. It's like, shouldn't there be a notch here so I can tear this open easily? There we go. Aha! PCIe riser cable right there, looking very pristine, and all white, and according to the manual, at least this is a Gen 4 riser cable. Just wanted to confirm. Because, as you can hopefully see, this is a 2-chamber or dual-sided design for the Mini ITX build, which means this side is where your graphics card would go, which means it can support really long graphics cards, up to 360 millimeters long, according to the side of the box that I just double-checked. So again, that's plenty of length for a graphics card. I think the main limitation here with this case in terms of GPU support is going to be the width here, because again, you got triple slot. So again, just bear in mind that length that they have on the GPU, and then keep the triple slot, you should be fine. Flipping to the other side, these panels, they pull off really nicely. They just have a couple magnets that hold them in place and some notches on the bottom, so pops on like that, removes like that, super easy. And here's the other side of the case where you're going to have your motherboard mount on this side, and then here's where your SFX power supply can fit as well. And you will note they also have a extension coming back here for to plug in the power supply, so you can plug in the system at the back. And this is the one thing I've been warned about when building it in this case, is that the extension here can sometimes stick out and conflict a little bit with the motherboard installation, but thankfully a couple screws in the back will allow you to remove that if you need a bit of clearance to get things installed. Oh. That's cool. It's an interesting little thumb screw right there. It's like a captive thumb screw, but like It's the fanciest captive thumb screw I've ever seen. Wow, as someone who has a thumb screw logo, Thermaltake, make me more of those thumb screws. Anyway, here's the top panel, which has a little bit of dust filtration, and because this is where you can fit your radiator. We're doing a 240 today, but you can actually fit up to 280 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler radiator up here. And that pretty much wraps it up for our oh look, it's another one of those cool thumb screws. I said we were done, but we're not quite. One more of those allows you to remove the bottom of the case too, and you can see there's plenty of clearance there for air to get in if you're going to have any intake happening down on the bottom of the case. And this is another great feature for Mini ITX builds. Often accessing different parts of the motherboard where you need to plug things in and connect stuff can be a challenge. So being able to remove like all four sides of this, it also has a removable bracket down here for the all-in-one radiator, means that you're just going to have a lot of easy access to the components inside, which should help with the build process. And we're gonna build this system, and then I'll let you know how it goes. We're getting our motherboard installed. We have a little bit of clearance behind the tray, so I was able to leave the heatsink on the rear-mounted M.2 drive back there, hoping it won't have any conflict with the GPU once we get that installed. If it does, I can just remove it there and remove the heatsink. On the other side, I'm noticing just some interesting, some unique things here. For instance, this motherboard has an audio riser cable that brings your HD audio right up to the front and center there, so you can get yourself a really nice view of the blast of color here on our all-white builds, but you know what? I might just not plug that in. Another feature on this motherboard that's becoming really popular is this release button that you push to release the GPU latch. On a Mini ITX build, that's actually really helpful because sometimes it can be really difficult to get down and push that latch to disengage the GPU, or in this case, it's going to be a GPU riser cable. Because that's there though, they have this plastic housing around this corner of the board, and so they have a little icon there that says, hey, that's where the screw goes. But different motherboards might have different motherboard standoffs with different threading, which was exactly what I thought to myself as I went to fish out these screws. They give you a couple longer screws, but they've included one of each. You have UNC 632 and also M2? Is it M2 or M3? I'm forgetting right now, but you got one of each, depending on what standard your motherboard standoffs use. Thankfully, our baggie of screws and stuff that came along with our TR100 has some extra standoffs in there, so we can use that to check, and it's not that one. It's the rougher threading, the wider gauge threading, so that is the screw we will use for this corner of the motherboard. And there it is, the build is complete, and my goodness, isn't it nice? I'm very happy with how this build turned out. I spent some extra time on the cable management. I actually went back, unplugged, and sort of rerouted everything after the system was assembled and after I had powered it up at least once to make sure everything was functional. I didn't do the outside of the box test boot with this system, so I was a little bit nervous that everything was functional, and thankfully, yes, it was. Before I get into my notes on the build process though, I just want to point out for anyone who wants to build this system, or a system that looks exactly like this, but you're building a gaming PC, not necessarily a system for video editing like we're doing, you only really need to swap out a couple components to make this pretty much the best gaming PC you can build. The CPU, you should go with the 7800X 3D, or even more ideally the 9800X 3D, which should slot into this system just fine, and a 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler can handle no problem. You can even upgrade to the 280mm all-in-one cooler if you wanted, and then you'd want to pour the rest of your money into the GPU because this case supports much larger GPUs, so going with a 4080 Super or a 4090 even, or by the time this case is widely available, there should be RTX 50 series options on the market as well. Again, just making sure you stick to the length and width and slot dimensions that the case supports. This could easily be reconfigured to support the fastest hardware that's available for PC gaming right now. A few notes on the build process though, and some of the components that I used. The motherboard, the Gigabyte X870i Aorus Pro Ice, is a very cool, pristine, very aesthetically pleasing all-white motherboard. If there was something that could have been added to make it like even better, it would have been a third M.2 slot. It's only got 2 of those. A third one would have been nice. It still has USB 4 support, but for example, there are B650 Mini ITX motherboards that have a riser card that supports 2 M.2s and then a third one on the back. There's B650 boards with 3 M.2 slots. It'd be cool if this one had that too. And for some reason, the position of the front panel audio header, I don't know, I just get a kick out of it, how prominent it is, and that's usually like the least aesthetically appealing cable in any build. But that's okay, you shouldn't plug into the front panel audio ports, just plug straight into the back. That's what we're gonna do. As for the case itself, the TR100, it's really nice to build in, and I will say this is the most like spacious Mini ITX build that I've built in, while maintaining still a pretty small footprint for the case itself. I'm sure there are a few small form factor enthusiasts out there who are like, oh, it's not like the size of a teacup. I only build in cases that are the size of a teacup or smaller. But the fact that you can support graphics cards up to 360mm long, and again, just looking at the shot of like the GPU side of this, it's the side of this build that seems the most empty because I clearly could have gone with a larger graphics card. And again, just to reiterate, I was choosing some of the components for this build before I knew I was going to be using this case, so I was basing some of my selections on a different case. I also appreciate how easily the side panels pop off, just held in with magnets. They're held on pretty securely. Thermaltake has always done a great job, and they're continuing it here, of including dust filters for pretty much any place where there might be air going into or exiting the case. And the fact that not just those side panels pop off easily, but also the top panel and the bottom panel meant that you can really pick up the case, move it around, reposition it however you need to in order to access like the bottom side of the motherboard where you might have edge connectors. I spent a lot of time working just on the bottom of the case right here, where there is a pass-through, by the way, for the power supply, which is also helpful because you can actually reach your power supply switch. And if you didn't want to use the AC power extension and route it through the case, you could actually just pass it out through the bottom here if you wanted to, so you can skip that plug if you don't want to use it. This is also one of the only places where I could tuck away some of the extra cables to have it not too visible. And it's also kind of silly because that's really just for the purposes of video, because I wanted this system to like be really clean with the finished build. Also, we have this very cute little Wi-Fi 7 antenna there. I mentioned the motherboard only has 2 M.2 slots, but we're not completely out of storage options. We could add 2.5-inch SSDs if we wanted to. We're probably going to be working with external drives, and I guess one of the benefits of the X870 chipset on this motherboard is we do have USB 4.0 support, which is cool. But I also want to point out that there are two 2.5-inch mounts for SSDs at the front of the case, one on this side and one on the opposite side. You actually just mount them from the side, so the SSD is only held on by 2 screws from the side, but they don't have any moving parts or anything, so that's just fine. And then lastly, I want to point out a couple criticisms that I have for the case. These might be things that they could change in the future, but one, that front power LED is blue by default. It's not RGB, it is a standard power button, so it's always going to be on. It's funny because you could potentially disable the LED for the power if you didn't plug in the LED header on the motherboard, but it's only got the block header, so you have to plug all of them in. And I love that block header because it's so much easier to plug in motherboard front panel connectors, but in this case, it might be nice to disconnect that blue USB, or it would have been great if Thermaltake went with something white or a bit more color neutral so that we could have more RGB options that didn't have to blend somewhat with blue. That's why I've gone with pink, because I feel like the pink and the blue works pretty well. The only other thing that came up in the build process was that when I had everything assembled, there was conflicts with both of the fans on the top AIO. Over on this side, it was caused by the 12VH power cable, which is why I routed it up and across the front to get it around there to the back, which I think looks pretty nice. And then the ribbon cable that loops around here so you can plug in the graphics card was sticking up a little bit too high, so I just had to get my finger back in there and sort of pull it this way to eat up a little bit of that slack and pull it out of range of conflicting with those fans. Beyond that, for the lighting right now, actually the RGB is all being controlled by a Gigabyte software. The Gigabyte Control Center, which is not the best software I've ever used by far. I wish it didn't automatically try to install Norton internet security when you just download the stupid software. Gigabyte, I don't like that. Stop it. On the plus side though, it's recognizing the RGB LED control for the motherboard, the graphics card, and the memory, so I'm happy to say that the G.Skill memory is being recognized and controlled by that one piece of software, and I thought I might be able to get away with just having the Gigabyte Control Center app installed, but we also have an LCD screen on our all-in-one liquid cooler, and it does have just enough clearance to tuck in behind the side panel. And I actually think it looks pretty nice. Like, it's still readable and everything there, and I really like how this looks through the side panel because it's ventilation and it looks nice too. But the display was upside down at first, so I had to install the Thermaltake RGB Plus software, which I could also do some lighting control and stuff with, but I basically used that to flip the LCD around and change the color scheme, so it is again nice and matchy-matchy. And I think with that, I've said about all I have to say, at least within the time allowed for this build. So I want to say a huge thank you to Thermaltake for sending over the TR100. I'm very happy that I was able to be one of the first to do a system build in this case. We'll be taking this to CES, where we'll be doing a bunch of coverage next week, so subscribe if you're not already to get appraised of all those videos when they go live. And yes, we'll give you some feedback on this system's performance as we take it to the show as well. But that wraps it up for this video, you guys. Once again, all of the components I used are linked in the video description down below. I want to say Happy New Year to all of you. I hope you have had a great 2024. We're looking forward to some awesome stuff launching in 2025. So stay tuned, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. We'll see you all in the next video.